Right, and in focus on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Thanks for staying on. Russia is calling on the BRICS group of countries to extend the use of national currencies and integrate payment systems. This as the country has essentially been cut off from the global financial system after sanctions imposed on it for its invasion of Ukraine. The country is also calling for the fast-tracking of a BRICS financial messaging system and the creation of an independent BRICS rating agency. To talk to us more about this, I am joined by Director and co-host of Ubuntunomics, Sbu Nyati. Sbu, good to have you with us tonight on In Focus. How do we read this urgency with which Russia is calling for implementation of these interventions? Is it as a result, of course, of the pressure they are feeling from the sanctions?
Yes, hi, good evening to you and your viewers, Tabo. Well, the Russians are a bit under the whip because they had foreign reserves of about 630 billion, and they can only use 40% of that. And so not having access to their own reserves is something that I think they didn't, they might have thought of it, but it has hit them hard. And so that's why there is this urgency, because their currency, they don't have foreign reserves to tap into should their currency be under severe pressure.
Russia's preferred multilateralism or multilateral institutions would mean that, I suppose, the BRICS would have its own things, its own rating agencies, its own currency, its own banking system, etc., etc. Is that multipolarity viable in practice?
Well, the BRICS have been thinking about it. There's something that they call BRICS Pay, which would allow for banks within the BRICS countries and SMEs to trade using e-commerce. So they have already been thinking about it. I mean, starting way back in 2014 when there was that Crimea crisis, and there were threats to take Russia out of the BIC, the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, and so they quickly thought of a plan to circumvent those moves by the U.S. and the West. So there is that, but the main problem is that the BRICS Pay has not been actioned as yet. They were thinking about it, and now they want to do something so that they can include more countries. I mean, 42% of the global population comes from the BRICS countries. But the main problem for me is that you still rely mainly on the West for markets, for consumer goods and services, and so the BRICS countries only have got a global trade of about 18%, and 25% of the global GDP output is from these BRICS countries. So the BRICS countries have got a sizable population, but the West still has a monopoly. The hegemony is from the West in terms of trade and economic output.
Do you think, though, with the current crisis that has come up because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, BRICS countries would find it necessary to expedite this implementation of this tool to protect their own economies?
Oh, well, the BRICS countries are already doing that. I mean, you can see just yesterday, it is reported that Joe Biden called the Indian Prime Minister to warn him about buying a lot of Russian oil. I mean, the Indians are getting a 33% discount on Russian oil, and the Chinese are also siding with Russia. In a way, South Africa says they are neutral, but in a way we are part of BRICS, and so we are part of all of these machinations. So there is sort of like trying to de-dollarize and to trade more within the BRICS countries. There is that move already.
Yeah, and would that potentially then lead to significant consequences in such a manner that, for example, South Africa and India and China being then excluded from international organizations like the UN Security Council?
Well, I mean, the World Bank, for instance, issued $700 million to the Ukrainians, and they are about to give them an additional $3 billion. So you can see that the Bretton Woods institutions are also, in a way, being political in the way that they finance. So they've taken sides, and so people might say that these are independent institutions. I'm talking about the IMF and the World Bank and other institutions aligned to those. So basically, there is that alignment, that economic alignment, that alignment between economics and politics. And so the Russian war is not only a military operation, but it is also an economic war.
Yeah. In your view, what does the current moment call for? What does it demand from a united BRICS bloc?
Well, a united BRICS bloc, if it wants to de-dollarize, it should think more about other institutions that they would need, because they would need an alternative to the Bank of International Settlements. They would have to come with that, sort of like have a bank for the different central banks within those countries. And then they would have to come up with their own sort of like alternative to the IMF, so that they can, if they want to trade more within the bloc, that they would have to have measures to ameliorate things like budget deficits or current account deficits. So they would need, they already have the BRICS Bank, but the BRICS Bank would have to be beefed up. So it is highly likely that there will be more trade within the BRICS countries, but they need institutions to go with that.
Yeah. Turning it to the international community, the politics of ostracization, do you think they stand any chance of success, at least, in securing security for the people of the Ukraine?
Well, that's the U.S. and the West have been isolating those countries that do not play along. So we are bound to see more of it. As I was saying to you just recently, the Indians are under pressure from the U.S.
Yeah. But whether or not it will be successful, I mean, in bringing a little bit more security, I suppose that question is still yet to be answered.
Yeah. I mean, these countries are standing their ground. That we must say. We've seen South Africa standing their ground, India standing their ground, and China standing their ground. So I don't think they will be pushed over. So there is currently a realignment of global politics and